If you guys don't know who OnSolve is, we are a global leader in emergency management notification systems, and we're really excited about having some of our customers speak to you guys as we have been traveling the world, talking to our customers, learning that there are some really interesting trends going on in business continuity management and some of the things that global organizations face that are definitely changing. And so, some of those things that we are seeing, I'll turn over to Mark to talk about.
Sure. I think we're in a unique position being in a communication-centric industry to see some very targeted geographic trends from our customer base. And we're not speaking specifically about emergency notification or global notifications, but it is interesting to see that it's not just global companies, it's US-based companies, it's multinational companies. The increase in communication traffic that we see across our customer base year over year here has grown dramatically. So we're seeing companies of all sizes having some element of international aspect to their continuity plans, really.
And having to think globally has a lot of people grappling with some of the concerns around data privacy and some of the diversity of needs that different geographies have. And so we're going to talk about that with our panel in just a second here. One of the elements that is definitely probably top of mind for a lot of you guys is GDPR that comes into effect the next couple months. And so in the systems that you're looking at and in the communication plans that you're looking at, it's something that you're definitely going to want to consider for, but we're going to talk about a whole range of options.
And then we'll also explore some trends in cultural adoption and adaptation that we see and let our panel speak specifically to some of the challenges they've seen. So, every culture is different. Within a culture, you may even have micro cultures that what works in one area may not work in the other. So I think you'll hear from the ladies here that they've had to be creative in some cases and adaptive in some cases to ensure that their programs are carried out globally.
Well, we'd like our panel to introduce themselves. And so, unfortunately, Courtney was not able to join us through logistical issues with flights and so forth, but we're going to start with Anya.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Anya Fleischer, and I work at Autodesk. Autodesk is a software engineering company, so we are global in that sense, and we provide our customers with design tools to create whatever that they may need. And we have 120 locations worldwide. We are in over 40 countries. So there are a lot of different things that we do from a business continuity perspective, but I'm a team of one. So I rely on a lot of individuals across the world to assist me with this program. And a fun fact is that I recently graduated with my MBA, so it's been a journey.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Anya. Jenny?
I'm Jenny Fortunato. I work for ConocoPhillips. I'm based in Houston, and I'm an emergency response consultant. That's part of our corporate crisis management and emergency response team that we have to support all of our global business units. The company as a whole has about 13,000 employees spread out around the globe, and we manage the larger scale type incidents and support our business units with incidents that would become too large for them to manage with their local resources. So there's a number of different communications use cases that we manage out of there, and importantly are the fun facts probably. So my emergency response specialization is in subsea well blowout response. So after the 2010 Deepwater Horizon incident with BP, there's been a number of industry consortiums that have come together to help each other plan and develop specialized equipment for those types of incidents and shutting in subsea wells. So I spend a lot of my time working on that. And then the most challenging test of my emergency response skills has definitely been my toddler. I'm very blessed that my second-born child is a constant source of safety moment material to start all of my meetings, which comes in very handy when you work in this type of position. And I train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And last and not least, I enjoy and collect great tequilas. So if you feel so inclined, if you see me at happy hour, you know what to buy me.
Great plug.
Catherine.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine Whitaker, and I head Business Continuity Management for Nestle in North America. If at any time during my panel participation you find me boring or uninteresting, there are actually 6 exits located to the back of the auditorium, so please make your way to the nearest exit. I was trying out Karen's, our first speaker's attempt at humour. Did it fail miserably?
You did great.
Yeah.
That was great.
Supposed to check back in with the audience to see that it works well. At Nestle, we manage the whole gamut from emergency response, incident management, and crisis management, all the way through to business recovery is the scope of my work, and I'm very pleased to be here today.
Great. Well, that's our panel, and all right. So we've got a few things that we're going to talk about. The first question that I'd like to ask you guys is if you could talk about some of your bigger challenges that you face while running global programs as they relate to business continuity, specifically around employee accountability and their safety. We're going to start with you, Anya.
Thank you. So there are a couple of challenges that I face on a daily basis. I think one is ultimately around sponsorship. So I'm based out of the Bay Area in San Francisco, and finding sponsors for the program to engage employees and to spread the message has been somewhat challenging, and it's ongoing. So obviously with time constraints, that's the second piece, is when you're working with teams across the world, you know, you have 12.5-hour time differences. So there has been 2 a.m. calls, and but that's something that we can kind of just take as we go with the field of work that we're in.
Jenny, any?
I think the biggest challenge overall that we see with all the different aspects is getting the leadership buy-in for emergency response and business continuity that doesn't necessarily have an immediate and measurable return on investment. So it's challenging a lot of times to get the support and sponsorship that we need there. And we do that by managing a global support team that requires a lot of resources and requires some budget. So it's very important that we do get that management buy-in somehow. So we're constantly focusing on that.
Great. And Catherine?
At Nestle, our purpose is really around enhancing quality of life and contributing to a healthier future. For us, that really begins with our commitment to quality, to protect the safety and well-being of our consumers, our customers, and our employees. Business continuity management is really the framework around which we manage risks holistically. I think ensuring business continuity in times of crisis, protecting our workforce, and still attempting to achieve our goals is obviously very challenging. Implementing a global business continuity management program certainly has its challenges, and I'm sure there'd be lots of nods around the room with that today. Certainly in my experience, gaining alignment to a common business continuity management standard or approach is really critical, and I think the first key step. Once you have that agreement at a global or even a senior management level, it's then vitally important to really disseminate that information in a way that clearly communicates the methodology and allows for translation at a distance too. Providing standardized materials certainly allows for effective execution while allowing the action to be localized. I think when you provide this clarity around the framework, that will allow you to achieve your goals.
Great.
Fantastic. Some really great starting points. Let's dive in a little bit on some of those concepts. I'm sure that the concept of executive buy-in and sponsorship is something that no one except you guys here struggles with. So you guys are all bought in across your enterprises, but maybe you could just share, Anya, you mentioned you have a challenge engaging resources, and share some ideas on how you've maybe tricked them into engaging.
Sure. So I think this profession is all about relationship building, especially if you have a small team. And the tone from the top, as we talked about, is important. So what we tried to do initially is to create a tone from the top at the executive level. So our CFO is the sponsor of the program. And at that point, once we have that coming from the Americas, for example, it's that much easier to engage other VP level or senior director level across the globe to kind of buy into that message. And the only way that we can do that really is through managing the relationship with these individuals, to letting them know what's in it for them as well, because it's not just for the company. They will learn really valuable lessons for themselves and for their family and through educational opportunities, and ultimately to protect themselves and the company that they work for. Obviously, thanking management for their contribution helps with engagement. So we don't ever want to fear monger. Business continuity is in itself a crisis management, incident management, but it's all about creating a culture of inclusivity and keeping things positive. And like an interesting way that we sell our pandemic plan is through zombie apocalypses. So we've done some practice around that, which was a fun one to do. Mm-hmm. What we really look for in an individual when we deem them to be a sponsor is someone that has enthusiasm to learn and to contribute to the program, and then that they can quickly establish some authority around what's happening with the crisis that may be happening regionally. You also want them to be a good communicator and well respected in the region that they're working in, and ability to connect with others through either their own relationships or in the way that they manage the crisis to adapt to the situation that are often volatile in nature and localized. So it's really a knowledge, and there's nothing that could be compared to enthusiasm to learn. And so that's what we really look for in our sponsors and our representatives across the world.
So there's a right fit to the kind of person that can do this for you.
Yes.
It's interesting. And we'll probably touch on this a little bit later in the panel, but it's interesting that you do decentralize some of this responsibility regionally. Jenny, how have you engaged leadership, and what's worked and what hasn't maybe today?
Yeah, we try to invite our leadership all the way up through our executive leadership to as many events as we possibly can. We always invite them. We always try to work in an executive leadership team briefing into exercises. Sometimes we may even develop a very low investment, no homework involved type of role for them to play to make it easy for them to participate.
Like a panel moderator or something like that.
Yes, like that. So in 2017, we had an exercise with our Australian business unit, and we have a very experienced member of our global response team who serves as an incident commander, and he's invaluable to our team. And there was pressure from leadership that his time could not be dedicated to the annual training and maintenance of his emergency response skills to participate on that team. And so we worked in a lot of leadership involvement into that exercise. And once that business unit president was able to see how important his role was and how much actually in an incident she would actually need his support as an incident commander, the tone completely changed. So a lot of times some of the issues that we have are pretty easily solved with just exposure, because there's just sometimes a lack of understanding because they don't have the time to participate and really understand the business continuity and emergency response world. So we always try to just work them into our events and invite them to participate as much as possible. Doesn't always work, but it's helped in quite a few cases. Some of our leadership is more data-minded and data-driven, and so we've also started an initiative to take all the way down from each asset and the risks and the risk registers there, and create a flow up to the enterprise level so that we can see these are the risks that are appearing most, and this is how we are composing our global response team to align with those risks. This is how we are structuring our exercises and our training to align with those risks. And having that as a communication tool has really helped to inch some things forward as well.
Fascinating. And you both mentioned inclusion and inclusivity there, so it's really interesting. That's great. How about, and I'll throw this out maybe, Anya, you want to lead us off, but we're talking global here. So we've got this, time zone challenge. You mentioned taking calls in the middle of the night. So there's the personal challenge, but apart from that, how do you deal with the challenges of a global program? Follow this on staffing and...
Sure. So most of our plans are global. So we are dispersed in a way that, for example, I'll use customer service is able to pick up. They do a handoff every day. So when we do planning, we ensure that there are functions that can recover in another geo or in another region should one of us become unavailable. That is very important because we're out of San Francisco and there's it's earthquake country. So we anticipate there may be issues in that capacity, and thus we need someone else to kind of pick up the work if we're not available. The way that we keep our program going is to keep it simple. I think it's really important with the different individuals throughout the world is that our meetings are recorded. So whenever we have a meeting, whether it's with the APAC or MEO or Americas, we always record that meeting. We're working on interactive training that individuals can do on their own time. And that has been very helpful because then I could say, okay, look at this link and then we'll connect in a week to explain some of the processes around that. And I try to conduct all of my onboarding in person, but I think we'll talk about some of the capabilities that we use a little bit later.
That's great. Other comments on time zone challenges?
We do a lot of the same scheduling tricks that you mentioned, and then also sometimes if we have groups that there is a benefit to all of them being on the same call rather than scheduling multiple, then we'll just rotate and kind of take turns and do in Central Time, 6 a.m., and then the next time we have that meeting, we'll do a 7 p.m. And it'll be an ugly o'clock for someone somewhere, but we're trading on who is really the one suffering, and that's helped and gotten
Someone always gets the
acceptance
bad
from
shift, right?
Exactly. But sometimes you really need to have everyone together for the full conversation.
Fantastic.
So in some of our discussions before we were up here on the panel, we talked about some of the cultural challenges that come into play when you guys are leading global organizations. And I thought that was very interesting how you guys dealt with that to be able to be nimble during a crisis. Jenny, do you mind sharing some of that with us?
Yeah, there have been a couple of interesting things that we've had to be mindful of in dealing with some of the different cultures. I think Norway probably has the most considerations that we need to take into account of a lot of our locations, mostly because the work-life balance is stronger there, so there's less response outside of work hours if we're doing call-out tests or things like that. And then they also have a very long period of holiday nearly a month where it's very difficult to reach people, and we've actually had to take that into consideration when we're staffing for that region of our global response team. So it's just making sure that you are aware of all of these differences and really kind of trying to stay in tune with your different locations and how they operate and make accommodations where you need to. And then we also had an interesting communication challenge with one of our European locations, and we realized that when they received automated messages in American English, in the American accent, they associated it with solicitation and telemarketing and were hanging up. And we changed the accent, and our response rates improved dramatically. So there's just a lot of little things, and you just have to keep the conversations going with your points of contact in your different locations to find out these little tidbits that can make a big difference.
We hope the telemarketers don't learn what those accents are that improve response rates. Catherine, any other ideas around the cultural issues?
Yeah, I think the biggest cultural issue that I've had to address, and that I'm sure many of you are addressing today, is changing the organizational culture. Personally, I love to travel, and when I meet interesting individuals and I go to new countries and I learn about the customs and cultures of those locations, I think it's very easy to effectively address those with one simple word, and that's just respect. And that can happen internationally, but it can also happen within your workplace, within your very small location. If you have respect for each other, that's a great place to start. Certainly when we've heard from Anya and Jenny, I've had those challenges too, whether it's languages or time zones, information sharing. But I have found all of those things can be effectively addressed using different technologies, and there's obviously different platforms that address those different things. But certainly changing the organizational culture for me has been difficult. I've had to become a change agent, which is not necessarily my strong suit, but whether you're thinking about adopting a risk management mindset, or you're thinking about embedding business continuity at every level of your organization, whatever it is, I think you have to respectfully be able to challenge the status quo. You have to think about a long-term plan that's well beyond your current role, and that is something that is going to be put down effectively for the business long after you've gone. And accepting that there will be challenging times ahead, and there will be many times when you're misunderstood by almost everybody around you, but you have to stick with it and believe in what you're doing.
Perseverance is important. Yes. That's fascinating. We talked a little bit, touched earlier on decentralizing some of the responsibilities here. So I know none of you are control freaks, so this probably comes very easy for you guys. But how do you balance that, centralized versus decentralized? Catherine?
I can start. Do you want to start?
You.
Certainly in the world of business continuity management, where I come from, and I can't imagine that there's anyone in the room. I mean, put up your hand if you have lots of spare time today with the role that you're currently doing.
No.
I didn't see any hands go up, and I'm the same. So therefore, I think it really makes sense to centralize at the highest level of your organization, whatever that is, whether that's local here or whether you're dealing with a large global company as I am. Simplify, it's really 3 S's. It's simplify, it's standardize, and it's share. And this is really going to drive alignment with your business continuity management program and have a consistent approach. Things that you can centralize, examples of things that I have centralized, the methodology or the approach that you're going to adopt, the ways in which you're going to implement it, the critical activities and the key enablers, so things like the tools, the processes, the templates. This will drive standardization across your organization. In simple terms, what I'm really saying is to centralize the method and to decentralize the action. So decentralized is things like the facilities, the people, the local processes. And this enables continuity management and planning focus at the local level to really focus on the action that's happening for them.
Fascinating, fascinating. Anya, what would you say is important to centralize and what's maybe most important to decentralize?
I think Catherine covered a lot of this, but what we use is a concept of site leadership. So we work with our human resources department to determine the highest level of individual that is at that particular location. So if it's a senior manager, senior director, and that individual ultimately has the authority to make decisions about the office that we are operating on the ground. And this individual will also receive training around public relations, communication strategy, how to deal with local authorities. So we pull different teams together and have them be trained by, all at once, as opposed to, Treasury coming in, tax coming in. We have information securities feeding them information. So the goal with that is for the site leadership to flow up to the crisis management team in that region, let them know what's happening on the ground. That's the central piece of, in each region, we have a CMT, and then that flows up to the Americas CMT, and then upwards to CEO staff and the board.
So almost a tiered.
That's right, a layered approach.
Jenny, I know we maybe hadn't talked about this, but in your line of business, you guys have some really remote locations, I would imagine. Any unique challenges with decentralization and something that's extraordinarily remote?
Yeah, we do have a number of very remote locations that may have, two workers and a dog, and that's all that is there in some of our new country entries. And
could be, though, a very high-value location.
yeah, exactly. And it could potentially also be a location that carries some high risks as well. Mm-hmm. So in order to manage those, we have a very similar model to actually probably both of them. And it's a tiered approach. And while a business unit or an asset, even if it is that small business unit or asset in a remote new country location, they own any incident that is to occur there, and they will be the owner throughout the life of an incident. However, we have this global response team that's centralized and managed out of corporate, and we have about 130 responders that volunteer in addition to their day jobs to participate, and they can be mobilized to go support a business unit or an asset to build up a command team. So, and we also use the incident command system very heavily for even the smallest types of incidents, because you want it to already be in the format in case anything scales. So we always use that, and that's very important too, especially in those remote locations, that the system is centralized, and company-wide globally, we use the incident command system everywhere.
And there's familiarity with it across the board as well.
Right. And then the execution of that may be done by the asset or business unit, and then the corporate team is there to just support that if it's requested.
I just picture like people riding on dog sleds too somewhere.
Yeah, or ice road truckers to get to a command post. Those kinds of things are the types that we're facing sometimes.
It's amazing.
So when you have some things that are centralized and some things that are decentralized, and then a crisis does happen, as is inevitable in some cases, what are, some of the concepts that help you, deal with those challenges of being remote from where the crisis is, and how do you deal with that? And Catherine, we'll start with you.
Right. Remote management, you've hit the nail on the head, certainly has its strengths and its weaknesses. It can be challenging, if not impossible, to really understand the level of impact that a remote location is experiencing. Even in today's digitally and socially connected network with photos and video footage and speaking to people every day, really at the end of the day, you're not there, they are. So I think having a deep empathy for what they're going through is really important. And remembering that you are more than just the business continuity management role. You are their link between that remote location and the company, but sometimes also that remote location and the whole world, the external partners and vendors that you deal with as well. On the other side, the flip side to that, of course, in terms of its strengths, is that because you're not there, you can be very logical and you can be very objective in your approach. I think a great way to do this is to pick up all of the crisis management activities that you possibly can. So I'm talking about tracking timelines, doing their employee accountability for them, if you've got a great solution like OnSolve, of course. Gathering all the necessary internal and external experts, hosting those roundtable discussions about potential ways that you can move forward. Communicating both up and down within the organisation, and documenting. What this is going to achieve is it takes the pressure off the local team and it allows them to focus on what they need to get done. At the end of the day, I think the biggest lesson that I've learnt is that what people really appreciated was hearing those recognisable voices at the same time every day. Offering them support, giving them kindness and compassion and understanding for what they're going through, but also celebrating their success. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, their success is your success too. So that means that any small thing that they're able to achieve while everything else is going on is something truly to be grateful for.
Those are some very good principles to think about. Anya, from a technology company perspective, can you help us understand what you do?
Sure. So what we do is we try to keep things simple, as I stated earlier. We want to form habits. So in a crisis situation, we wouldn't want to throw somebody else to use a tool that they don't know how to use. And people tend to revert back to what they know best, which is email and SharePoint and Zoom, which we use for collaboration in our company. So we try to simplify the way a process is managed and an incident is managed through the use of everyday tools. So whether it means OneDrive that we use for collaboration, SharePoint that we get our updates on, or a standing Zoom meeting, that's what really helps because that's what people go to. And we don't want to overcomplicate because there's nothing worse than overcomplicating a crisis that's already,
or
ongoing.
introducing something new that they're
That's
not
right.
familiar with. Yeah.
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. So understanding those principles and those practical habits to follow up with make a lot of sense. One thing that occurred for us at OnSolve was during this last hurricane season, we were hit at our headquarters here in Florida and also some of our personnel in Houston. And so as an officer in the company, Ann and I were watching this unfold using some of these, rallying points of software, and we're able to be updated in real time without interrupting the people doing the real work and celebrating their successes. And so having a way for the executive team to understand what's going on, when to be inclusive and when to not, was really helpful so we didn't distract people from doing the real work, was one of our perspectives. And sort of thinking about how things escalate during the process, is there sort of an approach, Jenny, that you could kind of explain to us that from Conoco that you guys go through for that escalation process?
Sure. So our escalation process is fairly defined and it's fairly simple. So if it's a tier 1, that means the asset or the business unit is able to manage the incident with their own resources. Once they need to request support from a specialist in any field, so we have a number of different functional support teams around the company, mainly in corporate, but not necessarily. But it's a majority are longtime subject matter experts that are the ones that make up these functional support teams. If any of that needs to be requested, or if our global assist team needs to be requested, that's more on the process side. They'll come in and help fill the planning and logistics sections, the general ICS organization, and help with the process side of things. If any of those corporate resources need to be requested, then it's escalated to a tier 2 incident. And then once shareholders or board members are going to need some type of update and we need to stand up our crisis management team, then it's a tier 3. So that's how the escalation process goes within our model.
It's fascinating. Just curious, I'm picturing the dog sled or the ice tracker. You guys have such specialized equipment in your business at some of these locations. What's the most sophisticated or obscure thing that someone needs? Can we get a submarine here, or some crazy robotic things or stuff that you guys use?
Yeah, probably. It's probably going to be all of the subsea equipment. Some of the subsea equipment is very specialized and very expensive, so it's not very available. So all of the different subsea or the subsea welders, having subsea welding procured can be difficult and costly.
Specialized skill sets and equipment. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay.
Can I just add just a little
Please,
bit to that?
yes.
So as part of our functional recovery planning, we have a vendor list that each of the critical business functions needs to update on a quarterly basis. And to Jenny's point, some teams may have a more specialized need. I think the most specialized need in our space is we have workshops. So we have hazmat cleanup that needs to happen if there's a spill. So we make sure that the team, the EH&S team, maintains all of those contact lists on a regular basis. And we actually get the vendor list and their personnel list with the plan update to happen.
And some of those vendors are global, some are local.
That's right.
So.
And then if anything, they should probably have a backup vendor, because it does take some time to do the planning and the contract and all of that. So.
I mean, you wouldn't think of, you think of functional departments that are critical to your success. Procurement comes into play. Interesting. Okay, so we've got, I think we want to try and leave a little time. We've got a few more panel questions, but we want to leave a little time for audience questions. So I think we can do that through the app.
Right, we'll want to make sure if you have any questions for our panel that you put them in through the app as we're wrapping up our last couple of questions.
Yeah.
I think you've got the 8th one here.
Yeah. So I think we wanted to talk about where you might have experienced, we've talked about successes here, right? We know in our business things aren't always successful. Maybe some instances where we've got this division of management or responsibility, and we have remote teams or remote management. Can you guys maybe cite a time that's broken down or been something that was unanticipated that you had to manage through?
Yeah, I can speak to that. When we call in our functional support teams to assist an incident or an exercise, they are always going to be standing up in our corporate center in the EOC, remote from wherever the command post is going to be. So it's a constant struggle to get our command post to remember that there are these experts sitting in Houston just waiting to help them, and they're very capable, but we have a hard time getting the command post to pull on them and let them know what they can do to help. So we find that oftentimes, especially in exercises, we even have to pre-plan how they're going to support to make sure that they're not sitting there. So that's something that we've been working on a lot. And we find that it's sometimes some of the smallest things that can make a really big difference when you're dealing with remote management. We had an exercise in 2015 that was a very large exercise. It was somewhere between 200 and 250 participants, and it was out of our Indonesia business unit. And we were exercising a subsea source control incident. And we had security issues that prevented us from bringing all of the exercise players into Indonesia that we would have liked to. So we also set up a support team in Singapore. So we had Houston and Singapore and Indonesia stood up for this exercise. So we were, dealing with a lot of remote management and communication issues. And it was really the basics of our command post was quite noisy. So it was just difficult for them to make phone calls. Now we had actually the whole time, this is all coming out in the hot wash and debrief after the event is over, and we're trying to figure out why there was little to no communication between the different locations. And we actually had headsets, enough for nearly every participant in the exercise to have one and use simultaneously that would have enabled them to make the kinds of Skype or telephone calls that they wanted, but nobody paid any attention to the Pelican cases that were in the back of each of the command posts. So it was simple things like we have to actually open the Pelican cases and spread out the equipment on the table. It's so simple, but it would have made a really, really big difference. Or post all of the equipment that we have in the command post on posters. We had to have to advertise it somehow. And so that was something super basic. That we realized. And so in the end of the day, and we came to the conclusion that we actually would prefer to be entirely remote from the incident and have everyone in Singapore away from the incident scenario that we were playing, which was in Indonesia, have everyone together in Singapore versus having some folks closer to the incident and having the rest of the support team in Singapore, because you can do all these things that really help your communications when you're remote, but I mean, there is no replacement for face-to-face interaction. There just isn't. But another tool that we found that we use now a lot is also extremely simple, but we will just leave a computer open with a Skype video call running, or whatever type of video call that you like running all the time in the Houston EOC where our specialists are, and then in the corresponding operations branch in the command post. And we just leave it open all of the time so that someone can just go stick their face in front of it and say, hey, is anybody there? And grab someone more similarly to if they were in the same room. And it's a lot of those very simple things to execute that we've actually found the most helpful. But in remotely managing incidents as a whole, it's the standardization that we have of the system, that we know everyone is using incident command system, and we know everyone is using our management software, even for the really, really small incidents, so that if it does scale and we're now jumping in as the Houston support team, we don't have to get acclimated to the way that they're doing things. We can look in the software and pull out the information that we need to get grounded very quickly, and that's probably the most important thing.
Interesting. I'm going to finish up, before I do, finish up with the big question for you guys. I'm just going to, language barriers. No one's mentioned language challenges yet. I'm just curious how you guys deal with potentially, are there issues with language barriers?
We, so for our emergency notification, we use SendWord Now, which is an OnSolve product. And there's a capability in the system, so for whatever system you're looking into, to pre-record or be able to record the message before you send it. So not only are you sending it in English, you're also sending it in a localized language. That does require someone on the ground, such as a site leader or site incident command team, to do that, but there's a training that's involved from usually our life safety team that conducts that. And that makes it much more palatable for individuals because they receive the voicemail or the call in their local language in addition to English if it's like an expat that is working out of the country.
We don't have too many language barrier issues. I think it's more...
And we tend to think of ourselves like English is the universal language, right?
Yeah, a lot of times we do. I think it's more the cultural aspect of dealing with our counterparts in the other countries that are speaking other languages, kind of like the American versus UK English when we're sending communications and those kinds of things.
Okay. That just struck me as being something that was curious. So, okay, so if we had to summarize, and each one of you can please weigh in, the biggest challenge you have right now with respect to global management of your initiatives. If you had to boil that down of the thing that consuming your time, that is difficult to solve, that is resource intensive or challenging in some other way, if you could just pick the biggest.
I think for me it's turnover in employees. So when you have a reorganization, and this is unavoidable, I mean, this is going to happen. So we're constantly trying to improve things through training and the way that we're reaching out to people. However, when you have an M&A activity or you have just a constant churn in employees, you have a restructuring or you have a reorg, we lose a lot of those standing team members that may have kind of played a role last year, and now we have to retrain and re-exercise. But I think that's just part of our jobs, and being open-minded to that and knowing that that's going to exist no matter what, because people are going to come and people are going to go. And it's just building that foundation so that when individuals come on board, it's like streamlining. You know exactly what the content is, and to give that content to them and feed that to the individual is certainly helpful in that sense.
What I'm working on revamping right now is how to incorporate all of the lessons learned. After most events, exercise events, training events, or actual incidents, you collect all of this really valuable information, some of which we've all shared, and then what happens to it. And so we're really trying to make sure that we're being more intentional with where we put all of those lessons learned and how we're using them to develop the training programs and the exercise scenarios for the upcoming years. And it's turned into a much more challenging task than any of us originally thought it would, but it's definitely a very important one to make sure that you're continually moving forward and making progress.
And making those lessons learned valuable going forward, right? Like I can capture a whole bunch of lessons learned. Now how do I categorize them? How do I put them into play? Yeah.
Exactly, you have to use them, right.
I think for me, the biggest challenge in managing any initiative, whether it's local or whether it's on a global scale, is that once you have it implemented, don't stop. Really, when we think about ongoing management, it really means ongoing development in areas such as governance, the life cycle management, the planning, the training, the coordination, and the ongoing monitoring of activities. You really need to have a continuous improvement mindset. Find a way to lead regular meetings. Conduct operational reviews if that works. That's certainly what we do. We share experiences and best practices. We drive alignment, and we talk about the practical implementation of what is something that is actually conceptual in terms of its theory. And most importantly, I think when you have an established model for continuous improvement is to ensure that you're available. You are the subject matter experts in your individual areas. Being available, ensuring that you're engaging everyone and actively listening to their feedback. If that means that you need to make changes to your program, then you will need to go ahead and do that. Support your team. I think at the end of the day, and similarly to Anya, you know, I am a team of one, but I have hundreds and hundreds of indirect reports. And I consider that each and every one of their successes is my success, and we truly work together as a team.
Great insights. And in the final few minutes, we were going to open it up to see if anyone had submitted any questions using the app. So we'll see what pops on our screen for us to answer, if it pops on the screen. I don't know how this works.
If we're waiting for a question, maybe just a couple follow-ups. I heard very indirectly privacy. I didn't hear anyone mention GDPR, global risk compliance, new legislation in other regions. Is that something that's challenging to you? Are employees in other areas holding on to their privacy rights more than contributing to your program?
We definitely are seeing that in some of our regions. We have it's harder to pull some of their information and contact information. There's reluctancy to put it into the system, so we've had to get a little bit creative sometimes with our emergency communication system and provide lots of different avenues for them to input their data, some of which, you know, are hidden fields that are not viewable by anyone, but they can still input their data, and then the communications tool, MIR3, can still utilize it for us to communicate with them. So we've had to...
Without violating their privacy location.
Exactly. So we've just had to do a number of different ways. Even though it's all leading towards the same result, we've had to kind of accommodate what their comfort level is, which type of interface even will they feel more comfortable entering, you know, home phone numbers if they're on a response team and we need to utilize that for our after-hour call out and things like that. So it seems kind of redundant because we have, you know, 3 different platforms all leading into the same tool for communicating out, but we had to work with their comfort level, just culturally what they're used to sharing and how they're used to sharing it.
So it looks like we have some questions posted here, and I'll start with the first one. During a crisis in one location, what information needs to be shared more globally? And so Catherine, why don't we start with you since you're closest to me?
That depends. It can depend on what the incident type is, but more often than not, you're communicating both up and down within the organization, and those communication needs can be very different. Certainly at the executive level, locally within North America, but to our parent company in Switzerland and globally, it's summarizing the event and it's letting them know where we are in terms of our situational awareness, what's been done so far and what we plan to do next, but it's at a very summarized level. Down within the organization, we're often challenged with people just wanting to know what's going on with their fellow employees, even though they don't know them personally. They are interested to know how we are responding and what we know about their situation. So again, we're summarizing, but it's a very different level of information that we're providing.
That's great. And then Jenny, you already talked a little bit about this, but tips on how you solicit executive buy-in when disaster recovery and business continuity is not a priority for an organization, which it is in your organization, but how do you solicit it?
Yeah, it is a priority, but of course it's always difficult, and that's such a it's a really big question, and you have to appeal to the different styles of the different leaderships and even sometimes specifically the different styles of each individual member of the leadership. So as I mentioned, we try to appeal using the data with our global risk project, and that focuses just on any incidents that would require resources globally to manage. So we have a more numbers way to communicate the need, and then always we put them in the spotlight as much as possible and ask for their participation to do an ELT briefing as part of our exercises. We always have a member of leadership provide a introductory video to any of our e-learning modules and it's an opportunity for us to bring in that member of the leadership team and talk to them about this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and yes, it's very nice to show their support at the beginning of these e-learnings, but more than that, it's an opportunity for us to have an interaction with that leadership member and communicate the importance of that e-learning, and it's just another communication line.
Great.
It's interesting that you mentioned a numerical element in there, because I think when a lot of people ask that buy-in question, they're struggling probably more with budget, like buy-in equals give me money to go do my business continuity project. So numerical basis for potential loss, potential value of the initiative can really be powerful.
Can I just add to that? We heavily partner with what we used to have an ERM. So I manage ERM and BCP now. We kind of shifted that. But if you have an enterprise risk management team, I would suggest partnering with them and partnering with other risk groups in your organization. That could help you gain some visibility into what you're doing, what they're doing, and then streamlining those programs across the organization so that you're speaking the same language. And if to executives ERM is more important, then you can present your findings based on these are the risks that we're facing as a company. These are the strategies that we have in place to recover and restore if one of these risks are not mitigated or something bad happens. And so it's just partnerships with others. So you are a team, and you're not just doing your own thing across the various risk management and compliance functions.
Interesting. Yeah, it's great.
It's obviously something we're all seeing. I think it's unfortunate to say that risk is becoming an ever-increasing part of our working lives, but it certainly is from what I'm seeing, whether it's natural disasters or global social unrest, or even the severe weather. These things are challenging us, but they can be a good opportunity in some ways, not the scaremongering side, but to gather your executive leadership team or your senior leadership team together to really share your end state vision of what you want business continuity management or enterprise risk management to look like in the future. I think if you can clearly articulate that along with this is where we are today and this is where I hope to be in the future, and then show them those progressive steps and how you plan to get there, then that goes some way to, it ties into the dollars and if you have challenges in that area, then that can be one way to do it. But I think definitely getting them on board with your vision and sharing your passion for this area of the business and why it's important and making it relevant to them becomes certainly a very key way to achieve that goal.
Great. These are great answers. So we have a couple more questions here, but given the time, we're going to have some closing remarks, and we would love to continue the conversation at our booth or at our event tonight at Las Casitas, so we'd love to see you there. But as some closing thoughts, we definitely heard from everyone the importance of having certain elements of leadership within each region and being able to have the right tools in place to scale given the growth of global need of response. And we also were able to talk about some of the testing of that structure and when to include and how to include executive leadership. And so we want to thank all of you guys for taking time, and especially to our panel for sharing their insights of their day-to-day challenges. Thank you guys all very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Daniel and Mark, for a great panel. And thank, once again, our panelists here, Catherine, Jenny, and Anya. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great job.
Tonight at the event that is sponsored by OnSolve, you know now what Jenny prefers to drink, so I hope that you
And
get a lot of
collect.
beverages. Yeah, absolutely. So earlier, Catherine did point out all of the exits right here, and it is time now you can exit. There is coffee out in the lobby. Before you go, I would like to remind everybody about the exhibit hall raffle. Now, all you have to do is when you go into the exhibit hall, and it is open from 11 to 5 today, you go to any of the participating booths, they'll give you a ticket. You can put that ticket into a bin at the DRJ booth, and then you have to have them in by tomorrow by 1:15, and there are drawings for many prizes. But right now, go ahead, take a little break, head on back there, grab some coffee, and we'll be back here in about 15 minutes with our next session. All right, thank you.